Hello everybody and welcome to today's tutorial, which is going to be about pattern knitting on the Silver Reed 24 stitch punch card machine, also known previously as Knitmaster and Paizo, and I think in America and possibly elsewhere the Studio machines. These are the machines that do pattern knitting by means of 24 stitch punch card and a drum patterning mechanism on the back of the carriage, which is how the machine reads and transmits the pattern from the punch card to the needles on your machine knitting bed. Punch card machines have been around for possibly around about the early 1970s, and when they first came in they were a real revolution in what was possible to knit on a domestic knitting machine, and opened up sort of like infinite possibilities, because the previous machines had all been about push buttons and manual patterning. So when the first punch card machines appeared, they were considered to be something fantastic. These days, of course, you've got all sorts of newer options available, electronics and things that hook up to computers, but please don't let this make you feel in any way that your punch card machine is somehow inadequate. It's no such thing. You could have one of these for your entire life and still not exhaust all the possibilities of what you can do on it. And the other thing to sort of, let's have a little bit of a history lesson, is like, where did the punch card come from? Well, a couple hundred years ago or so, a guy called Jacquard invented a punch card system to use on the silk and tapestry weaving looms in France, which was the forerunner of what we see on our punch card machines today. I've got a little book here, it's really interesting. It's called Jacquard's Web by a guy called James Essinger, and it's all about the development of the punch card in the loom industry, and then how that became the forerunner of what went into the difference engine, which is like an early form of calculator or calculating machine, and then from then where modern computers were developed from. So this little book is really interesting read. There's a little picture in here of an old loom that's just got this thing here is the punch cards that we use for the patterning system, and another photograph in here of the punch cards that were used in the difference engine, how the Jacquard loom inspired Charles Babbage. These cards, amazing predecessors of the punch cards used to program the computers of the 20th century high-tech revolution, were in essence Jacquard cards, but used to weave calculations, not images. So your punch card machine is a direct descendant of that wonderful technology, which is, how we're all using computers in this day and age. Why 24 stitches, you might be asking yourself as well, or you might not, but if you're somebody like me, you might. 24 is actually a very useful number. It's divisible by 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 12, and of course 24. So it gives you a very big variety of pattern repeat options across the width of your punch card. If you actually have a look at a lot of the patterns that you see, they're not repeats of 24 stitches, they'll be repeats of 3 or 4 or 6. So 24 is a very useful number for being divisible by lots of smaller numbers. Whichever model of punch card machine you've got, whether it's one of the really early 321, 323, 326 series, or 360, or the 700, or the later 280, they all use the same principle, the same punch card drum-driven mechanism. So what you see me do today is going to be applicable to all of those models of the machine. Whichever one you've got, you should have got an instruction book, and hopefully also somewhere else some coloured photographs of the different options that the punch cards will do. So you also got a set of basic cards, basic set numbered 1 to 20. I took the information out of the instruction book and put it on an Excel spreadsheet, and I put this into the files on our group. So you can see card numbers 1 to 20 from the basic set that comes with your machine, what they all will do. All of them will do fair isle, some will do tuck, some will do slip, some weaving, etc, etc, etc. The cards are numbered down the side, so there's a card number 3. On some of them you might see a little star. I'm trying to find one. I've had a good look at why that star might be there, and the only reason I can find for it is that the ones that got the stars on them in previous issues of the sets, they had different patterns or different images on, but they still do exactly the same thing. So let's see if I can find one. 4, 5. Oh, I won't find one now. Because I've got a newer set. Oh, I can't find it at the moment, but take it from me that some of them do have stars down the side of them, and the only reason, as I say, I can find for why that might be is that they are different to that. Oh, here we go, here's one. Number 5 with a star down the side of it. That just means that that number 5 card is going to have a different pattern on it. I think it's the single motif ones, yeah. That's the one that's got the teddy bear on it. It's going to be a different pattern to the previous sets. And hey presto, she's there. Yeah, number 5 in this previous set is actually a rose. So that's the only reason I can find for why there are stars down the side. I've lost my bit of paper now. Right, so let's have a little look through the instruction book then, and have a quick summary of what the different pattern stitches do. So first up is fair isle. I think certainly when I first got my first punch card machine, the thing I couldn't wait to knit was fair isle, and it still seems to be the thing that captures most people's imaginations. When they think of a knitting machine, they think of being able to do this kind of thing automatically, and yes, you can. Absolutely brilliant. So fair isle, 2 yarns of different colour are knitted simultaneously and form patterns on the fabric. A variation of fair isle is the single motif. It works in exactly the same way, except that you're obviously going to isolate a portion of the pattern and just knit one repeat of it to make a single motif. It is what it says on the tin. You can knit one image, or you can knit 2 side by side, or you can knit 2 in different positions across the width of your knitting. Different possibilities there. Tuck stitch, one of my favourites. Perforated area of the card knit stockinette, and the non-perforated area leaves a loop of yarn in the needle hooks. You can tuck up to 4 rows using a medium type yarn. So yes, the pattern leaves a loop of yarn in the needle hooks, which is then periodically knitted back to make this pretty pattern on the reverse side of the fabric. Tuck stitch can be used either way round. If you do tuck stitch in colours, you can get a pretty effect on what would normally be the front side of the fabric, or likewise the reverse. And another possibility with tuck is to knit tuck lace. It's not a true lace because there isn't any transfer of stitches from one needle to its neighbour. You just get the open lacy effect by leaving needles out of work, and the operating table will tell you the sequence of needles that you need to put in and out of work to do tuck lace. Slip stitch, perforated area of the card knits stockinette, and the non-perforated area leaves a float of yarn on the purl side of the fabric. This is another one where you can have either the right or the wrong side as the side facing you in your finished garment. You can do slip stitching colours, which produces an effect similar to ferrule, but without the floats on the back. Punch lace, combinations of thick yarn and self-coloured very fine yarn or a see-through type of yarn produce the lace effect pattern. Again, it's not a true lace because the stitches aren't transferred to their neighbours, but by using this combination of thin and thick, you can produce a wholly fabric that looks a bit like lace. This was the forerunner of lace patterns before the lace carriages became available. On the early machines, it's all you could do. I think it sometimes might also be called thread lace. And weaving, another one that I really like. By passing a fancy yarn of different materials between the stockinette stitches on the purl side, a pattern is made on the surface of the fabric. The perforated area of the card passes the weaving yarn over the needles, and a non-perforated area passes the weaving yarn under the needles. The weaving yarn is not actually knitted into the fabric through the latches on the needles, it's just held in place on the surface. For those of you that do embroidery, a similar technique in embroidery you might recognise is couching, so not actually knitted through, and because of that it means you can actually use fancy yarns or boucle yarns, thicker yarns that you wouldn't normally be able to knit through the latches in the normal way on the standard gauge. You can use them as weaving yarns. I've used sort of hairy eyelash yarn and sort of lumpy chunky stuff like Noro Mosso is a very thick boucle yarn that will knit as a weaving yarn on standard gauge machine. Produces lovely fabrics, particularly if you use it together with tuck, because this you always need to have the reverse side of the fabric facing in. And put it together in combination with tuck, you can get some very, very stunning effects. Plating. Plating is not really a stitch technique as such. It just means that you can use two yarns together, but you don't feed them through the same feeder at the same time, so you just get like a jumbled up mess if you do that. You put one yarn through the plating feeder and one yarn through the normal feeder, and you then produce like a two-sided fabric. So one yarn is knitting on the back and one yarn is knitting on the front. Again, that can produce some very interesting techniques or effects. I saw something that an Australian designer called Tony Bennett had knitted using a black shiny yarn and a white shiny yarn, one on either side of the fabric, and it produced this like silvery fabric at the end of it when he finished, and very, very clever. You can use plating in conjunction with some of the pattern cards like tuck, so you get plated tuck. I must admit it's a technique I've not explored an awful lot, but interesting technique. L-knob function just means that you can elongate the pattern length. When it's on the normal standard function, the punch card rotates on every pass of the carriage. If you set it to the L-knob function, it rotates on every other pass of the carriage, so it just elongates the pattern, double its length. That's about it there. Oops. So, go back and find my pattern sheet, which I've put down and lost. I think the fairies have stolen it. Oh no, here it is. So, one other useful thing to note about the placement of the pattern on the machine is that if you have a look at the needle strip here, certainly on my machine it's got a red block and a white block and a red block and a white block. That means that the 24 stitch pattern is centred on the first 12 stitches either side of naught, and then in blocks of 24 going out on either side of the machine, as you can see. So if you are knitting something like a little row of cats, for example, or where you've got little images, you might get one here and then one there and one there, and depending on where your stitches start and finish, you might need to be careful where you centre your pattern to produce the correct effect of the finished thing, if you see what I mean. Right, let's have a little thread up and start doing some knitting. Just make sure there isn't anything else I need to tell you about that. I don't think so. So I've got some 4-ply acrylic yarn threaded up. Let's just put about 60 stitches into work. Roughly. I'm just going to do my standard open cast on, as this is just a little sample piece. Use my ravel cord. So at the moment I'm just doing stocking stitch. I've got no pattern in the, no punch card in the pattern selector. Canvas set to stocking stitch. The side lever is actually forward. Let's start that way. And I've just done a few rows. Now I can add my weights. Underneath of the sinker plate as it passes over. So I'm just going to knit a few rows and end up with the carriage on the left hand side. I'll just flip that brush up as it got flipped down. Finish with the carriage on the left. Right, let's first of all do a tuck stitch pattern. And we'll use card number 3. So what I'll end up is that pattern there. So I'm going to use card 3 and put the A part of it in first. And it's pattern number 18 on here. So in order to know what to do and in what steps to do it in, I'm going to have a look at the little operating table here, which is going to tell me how to do tuck stitch number 18. Let's try card 3. You probably know, as well as all the ready punch cards that you get with your machine, you can punch your own by buying blank cards and using one of these little punching gadgets. You can do your own patterns, so it gives you an infinite number that you can actually make. I'm going to use the card number 3 from the basic set, and it said to you put it in with the A arrow down. Your book explains why you've got A, B, C, D on these, just particularly when you've got like motifs or things that got an upside or a downside, that you feed the card in the correct orientation. So the direction of punch card. Each punch card has got 4 different uses. It's marked A, B, C and D, and that obviously explains what the difference is. On most of them it won't make any difference, some of them it will, some it won't. So 3A, release the punch card mechanism, feed it in, get a couple of yarn clips and join the card together. Join the front over the back, so that it won't get caught up when it's feeding, because that's the direction of feed through the machine. And then I'm going to just rotate that round so I get back round to row 1, which is 5 rows up on the silver reed machines, and I'm going to lock the card. So here I can refer back to my operating table, which is going to give me the sequence of moves I need in order to knit tuck stitch. So on all the patterns you're going to knit on the punch card machine, you must knit one setup row. And this is to read the pattern into the drums on the back of the carriage and ensure that the pattern is correctly set up so that you can just carry on knitting. Usually you finish with the carriage on the left, so you've got one pass of the carriage for your setup row, and then you'd start your normal knitting right to left. So here's your operating table. First line here is line 1, that is your setup row, and there's the direction of knitting, so it's left to right, which is carriage on the left. So the punch card is inserted and locked on row 1, so that's the lock symbol, the round mark. And the stitch length indicator is set to S because I want it to rotate on every row. On the main carriage section, side levers are back to the triangle position, and when they are back in the triangle position, this is then when the drums will pick up the pattern information from the teeth on the pattern selector. As you can see, where I've locked that card in, some of the teeth are sticking forward and some are back. That information, when I pass the carriage back, is transmitted into those drums through the pattern drums underneath, and it then tells the needles what to do, and I move the carriage across the machine. And then I've just got one yarn A in the main feeder. So we're all ready to go. Pass it across, and now I'm ready to knit tuck. So here I'll probably reset my row counter back to 0. As normally at the beginning of pattern knitting is where you're going to start counting your rows. And so on my second row, I'm going to release the card. That's what that move it from the round mark to the triangle mark. That means that the card will start to rotate. So every time I pass the carriage, it will move on one row, and a new row of pattern information will be passed into the drums at the back of the carriage. Leave that on S. The only other thing I need to change on here, it's all ditto, ditto, ditto until you get to the cam knob, and you're going to set it to tuck. T for tuck. Some of the earlier machines have got little symbols around here, but they're fundamentally all still in the same place as far as I can remember from moving from my Knitmaster 700 to this one. You've got Fair Isle, punch lace, stockinette, slip and tuck. You just have a look and see what it says on here to set your cam lever to. Nothing else has changed, and the to and fro arrows means you can just start knitting backwards and forwards. The one thing you must do in order to read the punch card pattern correctly into the carriage is you must ensure that both of those drums pass that pattern selector every time you put the carriage across the machine, right to left, left to right. When your knitting is centered on it like this, it just kind of like happens automatically. But later on, when you get up to the point where you might be knitting something where you're dividing for a neck and you've got knitting here or you've got knitting here, it's very easy to go like that with a carriage and not have those two drums pass the pattern selector, and that's when you get mispatterning on the machine. So just try to get into a habit right from the beginning on in of making sure that both the drums pass the pattern selector on both passes of the carriage. Anyway, so I digress. We have released the card, set it to tuck, and I'm ready to go. And as you can start to see, I'm getting a nice little tuck pattern appearing automatically as I knit to and fro. Excellent. Once you reach the end of the bit that you want to knit in pattern, you want to go back to stocking stitch. You just literally put your cam lever back to the stocking stitch position and lock the card, and then you can go back to knitting stocking stitch. There you go, tuck stitch. Lovely. card 3 looks particularly nice when knitted in colours. As you can see in the little leaflet here, 3 colours there or 2 colours there. We'll see different sides of the fabric facing you. Brilliant. Right, let's have a little look at Fair Isle. So we'll maybe change this card. And I'm going to change it over to a card that I've punched myself. Which has got a very nice diamondy pattern. So I've used blank punch cards which were specifically designed for the Knitmaster or Silver Reed machines, because row 1 is 5 rows up. I can't remember if I already said that the Brother and other brands of machine, the first row is 7 rows up. So I think unless they're lace cards, pretty much most of the cards on the different brands of machine are interchangeable. You just have to be aware that you've got a different starting row marked up the side of the card, because obviously that is your first row of pattern down here, but you have to make sure that you fed that right down into the pattern reading mechanism. So it's when the number 1 shows on the right hand side, it means that that first row down there is being read by the little teeth in here. Now this card is not a 60 row repeat, which is the standard length of a card. It's 10, 20, 30, 40, 42, 40, it's 48 rows. So I have cut the card short and then punched 2 rows of all holes across here to match the 2 rows that are all holes across here. And when you overlap the cards, those rows that have got all the holes in overlap where you clip the cards together and cover the first and last 2 rows, top and bottom of the pattern. It just enables you to have an overlap and to clip the pattern card together. Right, so let's put it in here. And like as before, put the front over the back. Feed that down and lock it on row 1. Now I've got a few rows of stocking stitch where I finished before, and this time my carriage is on the right hand side, so if I want to read the new pattern in and get back to where I'm going to start on the right, I'll have to make 2 passes of the carriage. Doesn't really matter, as long as you do at least 1 with the side levers back, the punch card locked and the carriage still on stockinette, it will read the pattern in correctly for when you're ready to start knitting. So again, I've just got my 4-ply in here. I'm just going to do 2 rows. So now the pattern is read in and it's ready to start knitting the Fair Isle pattern. So I'm going to have to set my cam lever now to Fair Isle, release the punch card, and if you have a look at the operating table for Fair Isle knitting, that's what I've done, release the card, set it to Fair Isle. It says you need to introduce yarn B. Obviously I'm going to do 2 colour knitting, I need a second colour of yarn. So just pull down the second one I've got threaded up here. Make sure the yarn gate is closed across the first one, which is in feeder A, and then just put that one into feeder B. And just hold it down underneath for the first row. And we're ready to go. Reset row counter if I want to. And as you can see, it's now knitted some of those stitches with white and some with red. Now, particularly on Fair Isle knitting, and you possibly might also want to do it sometimes on tuck and slip, depending on what sort of edge you want. You want to make sure that where you've got this yarn here, the last white stitch is about 5 from the edge. In order to make sure that both yarns are caught on the edge stitch, on every row of Fair Isle, pull forward the needle nearest to the carriage to the D position, and that will ensure then that both of those yarns are caught on the edge and you get a nice tidy set of floats on the back. forward. In while I'm doing this, make sure it's doing okay. So, as you can see, every pass of the carriage, both drums are passing in front of that pattern selector. Make sure that I'm picking up the correct information to knit the pattern on every row. If I had a big sweater on here and I divided the middle for the neck, I'd be knitting over on this side of it to do one side of the shoulder, and on the other side I'd have to, be consciously aware that these were passing the pattern selector every time I knitted from left to right. And sometimes it means you've got to take the carriage quite a lot of way past the edge of the knitting that you would normally do, but if you don't, then it won't pattern correctly. It doesn't matter whether it's fair isle tuck or whatever it's doing, you always have to do that irrespective of the stitch pattern. So. I think this had a 24 rows. 24. So I've knitted one pattern repeat of my nice fair isle pattern, and so I'm going to go back to doing some stocking stitch again. So break that off, just remove the second yarn, and you might want to wrap it round the edge needle there to make sure you can pull it forward if you like, if you're not doing anything in hold. Set it back to stockinette, lock the punch card, and just carry on knitting. There we go. And shall we do one last one? Let's do a bit of slip stitch. Let's have a look at, let's do card number 9. It's rather nice. So, slip stitch pattern is pattern number 29. I'm using number 30 rather, I'm using card 9A. So I can't remember if I told you that the basic set cards are numbered down the side here, just with a number. I think I did because I wanted on about the stars. Anyway, so then they've got 9A. Other sets have got letters in front, like L's in front means they're lace, R's in front means they're ribbon ones, but they also produce a lot of supplementary sets of cards which have just got card numbers on them. I've got some of the lace ones, and they start something like 391 through to 420 or something like that. I will get around to putting together a list of all the supplementary set card numbers and what they're used for. So anyhow, let's put this in here. Cards together. Down to row 1, unlock. It's number 30. So slip stitch numbers 29 to 32. So I've done this. I've locked my pattern on row 1. It's on the short one. I've got my triangles back, Russells to 2, that's on stockinette, and I need to memorise the pattern. So as I'm on the right hand side, I'm going to make 2 passes. And now I'm ready to release the card. So move that to the triangle, set it to slip, which is that one there, and just knit. The slip stitch pattern appearing on the reverse side there. Not quite as texturally appealing as tuck maybe, but can still produce some pretty fabrics if you wish to. Just a word here then maybe about tension as well, is that hopefully you all know about how to knit a tension square. If not, or I shouldn't say tension square because it isn't square, a tension piece. If not, that should also be in the files that tells you how to knit the various different size tension pieces depending on whether you've got a standard gauge with a green ruler, a mid gauge with a yellow, or a chunky with a blue. I always knit a tension square, always knit one. Doesn't matter that I might have knitted umpteen dozen tension pieces using 4-ply acrylic. Different brands, even different colours within the same brand, will have a different result on your tension square. And once you move into the realms of pattern knitting, the tension pieces will come out very different sizes to a normal stocking stitch one. Fair Isle will be slightly narrower and taller. Tuck will be much wider and shorter. Likewise slip weave, whatever you're doing. So just be aware that, I mean, believe me, it was a lesson I learned the hard way. One of the first things I knitted, lovely tuck jumper, came out the most peculiar shape because I just hadn't taken into account the fact that tuck stitch was going to have a very different tension setting to stocking stitch. So just so you're aware, always knit a tension square. So right, I've finished doing my slip stitch bit, going back to stocking stitch, lock my card, and now remove from the machine. Take the weights off. Have it. Nice little bit of tuck. As you can see, that's coming out nice and wide, whereas the Fair Isle bit's pulling in, and then the slip stitch is coming out wide again. And there's the Fair Isle pattern on the front. Slip stitch, you hardly notice much going on the front side of the fabric, but tuck, you can get a very pretty effect front side or reverse side. Again, this is much more comes much more to life when you do colour changes, maybe every 4 rows or whatever it might be. So there is your basic introduction to pattern knitting on your silver reed, and I hope you find it useful. Thank you.